Welcome to the Joy of SharePoint. Today, if you have not been paying attention to social media at all, which obviously you have because that's how you're here, we're going to be doing a Star Wars themed webinar about discovering the force behind Office 365 groups. With me today is Senior Stephen Wilson. How are you today, Stephen?
I'm doing well. I'm doing my best to recover from the punniness of this whole thing.
I just can't stand it. I love it.
I
I
know
love
you do.
it. So we have the questions panel. If you guys have questions, feel free to shout out. We've got Nick from Pate Group on the line with us helping in case Stephen and I are just so busy talking, which happens frequently. We don't see a question come in. So you can absolutely communicate with us that way. Even if it's not a question, if you have an observation, an experience, anything you want to share, if you've been here before, you know we love it. So please, please join in. And I
I
think
won't
the,
speak for
oh,
Joy, but
mm.
Nick is far cooler than I am too. So if you just want to have a side conversation with him,
He's, part of the
Sure.
younger generation.
Oh, that's my generation. Trying to get caught up.
Hmm. Microphone sounding a little sketchy, dude. A
I
little
was gonna
sketchy.
say he's cooler than I am, but his microphone's not so great.
Not so great. All right. All right. So I am obligated because I don't want to get in trouble to put up a disclaimer slide real quick because Pay Group doesn't own, Joy's SharePoint definitely doesn't own any of the Star Wars images that are in the presentation today, but we love them, so we're using them, and here is the disclaimer. Okay, that should make the powers that be very, very happy. So we're going to jump into it. The first thing I'm curious to find out, I have a poll. So let me select that poll and launch it. All right, just curious, the familiarity for you guys of Office 365 groups. Padawan, I didn't put youngling in because I feel if nothing else, if you've been around IT very long at all, you've had distribution lists. And if you know a distribution list, then you're at least a Padawan here because it's not going to be super different. I'm seeing a lot of Padawans and Knights, a few Masters. No one is brave enough to click Grandmaster. I get it. It's like I had someone ask me the other day, say, hey, you work with like Microsoft stuff. So you're an expert in all Microsoft things, right? No. And I actually kind of laughed and said, no, it's impossible. I can't even
I,
imagine the ego that would let you say yes.
I wasn't even gonna click Grandmaster if I could vote on this poll. So
You'd be pretty darn close if not. All right. I see that about 93% of you have voted. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds, then I'm going to close it down and we'll go ahead and just jump right in. Are we going to go super deep technical today? No, but I reserve the right to do that again in the future. I want to introduce our Padawans and even our Knights to some things that they may not be aware of. Masters, feel free to jump in if you have some experience or have some information that you want to share. All right, so I'm going to give it just a couple more seconds and 3, 2, 1, close. Thank you for participating in the poll. Kind of lets me know where I stand with people. So the first thing for getting started with Office 365 groups, especially if this concept is kind of new and kind of nebulous, is and I'm not going to say it in the voice, but you must unlearn what you have learned. It's a little different. It's not the same old distribution lists we're used to. That my favorite thing I've heard said about Office 365 groups is they're like distribution lists on steroids. And I like that quite a bit.
I did try to get her to change this. Unlearn you must what you have learned, but she would not do it.
I didn't. I don't always listen to instructions. Oh, I listen. I just don't always follow. Okay, so what the heck is an Office 365 group? It is the new, the better, the improved, the updated version of those old school distribution lists. Because when you create one from one of the various places in Office 365 where you can create one, you're going to get a shared email inbox, an address everyone can use, and a calendar. No matter where, you're going to get those assets. So maybe you're part of a group that needs to field emails from various areas inside the company. I know it's hard to change those processes, especially once somebody knows your name and they email you individually all the time, but persistence, right? You can have that joint inbox where everyone that's a member of it can see that email come in and can respond in kind, kind of like a help desk ticketing situation. That's what I always first think of when I think of a shared inbox, because that's where I started in IT, was a help desk, and that shared inbox was invaluable. And second thing, it's a membership service. If you are in an Office 365 group with a bunch of people, you all have access to the apps that were created with that group magically. It just happens. So hallelujah, I don't have to go add people to SharePoint, add people to Teams, add people to Planner, add people to the inbox, add people. No, it just happens. Now it's going to depend on where you create it. We're going to get into that here in a bit. But it just happens automatically. And another cool thing, Stephen, have you ever gone through the pleasure of having to take a distribution list and kind of monkey with it such that the people picker in SharePoint can see it?
Well, okay, so when that question comes up, I have to go through the definition of distribution group with the user, like they're talking about an Exchange distribution
Yes.
group or whatever the case may be. But yes, I have had the pleasure of doing what you have talked about. I will also throw out here, if anybody happens to use Exchange public folders, this is also Microsoft's preferred replacement to
Yeah.
Exchange public folders.
And here's a little totally unrelated nugget of information too. I once helped a client move from Outlook public folders to SharePoint. Outlook was never intended to be your filing cabinet. So if your organization or pockets of your organization use Outlook to save documentation and store it, and that's where you go to reference your data, please stop. Please don't do it. There are better ways. Okay.
Fun fact, the first version of SharePoint, like the very first version of SharePoint, actually was built into Exchange. It didn't have its own databases. It backended its data into Exchange.
We've come a long way. Wow.
That was SharePoint 2001. So yeah, it's it's a long way, 18
What?
years.
Man, okay, I don't want to think it. Okay, we're not going to go into the years now. I don't want to do math. All right. So not only is it a way you can communicate with that group of people very easily, but you can manage permissions across those applications almost seamlessly, right? We've been working with Microsoft for a while now. I don't think there's a whole lot that we could truly say is seamless. And that's not a dig at Microsoft. It's just reality. There are a lot of moving parts. That's just real life. All right. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to advance to the next slide. They're being quiet today, and that makes me nervous. All right. Here's another little piece of information. Office 365 groups are not an app. It is not an application within Office 365. And I think that was a little confusing for a while because I think I even still have it on my phone. There is an app called Groups, but you just use it to see the groups you're a member of. That's not confusing at all. But yes, it's not an app, but it gives you access to resources that are apps. Clear as mud? Clear as mud.
Not really.
I know, right?
I mean, because they have an app on the phone that's called Groups. Like there's,
Yeah. Jim has a question. So why even use groups instead of just using teams? Teams will create a group in the background. Exactly, which means you're using a group. And by using that group or being a member of that group, like when you go in and you add people to that group in Teams, you're now giving them permission to the SharePoint team site that's in the background managing security for your files. You're now giving them access into the planner plan that's created when you create that team inside of Teams. You're now also giving those people access to that inbox and shared calendar. So you're not going out of your way to do something with this group. It is happening for you when you create these assets. So if I create a team site inside of SharePoint, I get a group. I'm automatically in that group because I'm creating it, and I'm getting access to the SharePoint site and all of those Outlook goodies that come with it, the calendar and the inbox. And anyone else I put in that group also get access to those assets.
And so to answer the question a little more directly, you create the group wherever you primarily want people to interact with it. So if you want them to do it in Teams, then you create it in Teams. If you want them to do it in Planner, you create it in Planner. In the very rare circumstance that you would prefer that they interact with it through Outlook, then you would create it in Outlook.
Yep. Even Yammer. Yammer's even joined the party. Just curious, I don't have a poll for this, but I mean, give me a shout out if your organization is using Yammer heavily and or well. There is a difference for all the apps. SharePoint, some of our organizations use SharePoint very heavily, but not particularly well, right? That's why we're here, is to learn how to do it better. So I'd be curious. But Yammer has joined the Office 365 group party as well. Yammer, yes, says Nick. Not our Nick, another Nick. Nope, can't get any traction on adoption in Yammer. Okay, external customer focus groups, awesome. JD, I know you. Old org use Yammer tons. The new one doesn't use it at all. Okay, too many options. I did a webinar for you, Jack. If you want the link, I'll send it to you. Nothing like a little advertising dig in there. Yammer groups cannot be team of.
Well, you used your exact title.
I know, it is the exact title. Too many options. I'm actually speaking on that at SharePoint Saturday Atlanta. Plug. In 2 weeks. So, okay, it's out there. I'm just reading through the comments. Planner groups, yes. Planner groups can be teamified. SharePoint groups can be teamified. So if you're not ready for your people just to jump headfirst into Teams, start out with that SharePoint site and add it as you are able to manage it and as people are open to it. Okay, great. Great information. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate the feedback you're giving us. So let's talk about creating an Office 365 group. It may feel like you're in a Death Star situation because it's like everywhere you look, there is an option to create a group, right? Doesn't matter if it's a SharePoint site, Planner, Teams, Yammer, Outlook. Everywhere you look, people are presented with the button to create a group or create a site or create a team. And it's really scary. If you joined my 51st Teams webinar back in February, we kind of talked about that. It's like everybody that sees that button clicks it. And if you're an admin, you run to the admin portal and you're like, holy crap, there goes my clean architecture. But there's good news, right? Because we have policies. We have ways to control that. And how we create an Office 365 group, as Stephen alluded to, affects the assets and the resources that we're going to get. This is where it gets super fun. So pick an app, any app, but do so carefully, because where you start, I should have cut Excel out of that. It does not belong. In my opinion, Excel rarely belongs anywhere. Where you start with an app is going to determine the resources you're going to get. Teams was my favorite example there because I'm a Teams groupie. If you start in Teams, you get Teams, SharePoint, Outlook. That group is sitting there automatically, and you get Planner. It's actually supposed to be a Planner icon, but the image went funky. And that group is controlling security for you to every one of those assets. So when you're starting to create something, depends on your need, right? You need to be thinking about something very important. What does this group need? Do they need Planner? Do they need Teams? Do they need Yammer? Because in our Yammer situation, right, we're talking with people outside of our organization, or it's a massive broadcast platform, right, where a few people in the organization are broadcasting out to a huge number. That's a great use case for Yammer, but a group comes with it. What do they need? You're always going to get the inbox. You can use it or you cannot, right? It's not a big deal, especially now that we have Exchange in the cloud. There's not quite so much maintenance that goes on back there. Do you just need that shared inbox and a shared calendar? That has a really nifty web part on our modern site pages. Create it in Outlook. But if you need teamwork, you need a chat space, you need a site where you can manage those assets and run approvals and check in and check out and all that fun stuff, maybe you start from Teams. If you're not ready for Teams, start in SharePoint. Communication sites, though, I will say this, communication sites do not come with a group because they're intended to be a platform of broadcasting communication. So if you create a communication site, you're just getting a communication site. If you create a modern team site, you're getting that Office 365 group with those shared assets. Are we hanging in there? How are we doing? All right. Stephen,
Yes, ma'am.
where do you see people when you're interacting with our clients? Are you seeing them just wanting to start in SharePoint and start small and kind of get their hand on things? Or are you seeing a big interest in starting perhaps from Teams or getting Planner into the game?
I see a lot of interest in Teams, but I also see at the beginning of the phase, which is where I start with a lot of customers. I'm coming in at the beginning. I see a lot of them, they're kind of scared of Teams. They're scared of that create button, like you said.
It's terrifying.
They want to put a little control around it, but they're interested in Teams because Teams brings the possibility of having more in one place. You know, where the documents are in Teams, the communication is in Teams. And so they like that idea and they think their users will like that idea, but they think they may like it a little too much up front.
Right, because it's shiny.
It is shiny.
I was on site with some folks last week helping them do some deployment planning, which is always a fascinating day because I get to sit down and talk to people from all different parts of an organization and what they like, what they love, what they hate, what they want, what they don't have. And it's interesting, and I think it's just a part of our culture anymore. These folks never heard of Teams, but they're saying, you know, we need a better way to communicate with each other and a faster way to communicate. The word chat even comes up because if we're not texting, we're using a messaging app of some sort. And they're starting to go, you know, shadow IT. They're starting to go around the traditional email or Yammer channels and using some sort of outside resource for that fast communication. And not, you know, even there's still people that haven't adopted Skype for Business. And if they have, it's just not used that much for that remote situation because it's so hard to find those persistent chats. Well, they're not there. So we're seeing that interest even for people that don't know it exists. Oh, I see a question about hub sites. Do groups work the same way with hub sites as with communication sites? So you can hubify either a communication site or a team site. So if you do the communication site, you're not going to get that Office 365 group, which may be a good thing. If you already have them, if you're hubifying a communication site, keeps it a little cleaner, right? Less stuff is getting created in the background. And then you can join team sites to it that have all those other assets and resources. leverage through the Office 365 group. I'm just kind of reading a comment here. Huge sprawl issues, teams, groups, naming issues. Nick, when the webinar wraps, I'll go send you a couple of links to some policies that you can implement that can really help with that. Don't be afraid to name squat either. If you know down the road, it's like we domain squat, right? I'm not ready to use it yet, but I don't want anybody else to have it. Go create that company X HR team. You'll get the URL, you'll get the team name, and nobody else can. If you don't want to do that, there are some policies that we'll give that information to you. Oh yeah, you're welcome, no problem. All right, moving right along. So where can Office 365 groups be created? Disclaimer, I will not say that this is an absolute complete list, because it seems like every time I look around, oh, there's a song like that. Every time I look around, there's a new place to create either a SharePoint site, team site, or an Office 365 group. In fact, I could add OneDrive to this. Did you guys know there's a link in your navigation pane in OneDrive to create a SharePoint team site? Did you know that? I didn't know that till last month.
And that is why I have not claimed the Grand Masterhood.
So yeah, you're on OneDrive. Create a site. What? For real, it's there. So again, there are policies to help with that sprawl, to keep just anyone from being able to go create this stuff. Policies are important. Governance, I said the G word, I'm gonna say it again. Governance is more, I feel safe saying that, it's more important than it's ever been, because right or wrong, Microsoft feels that this is above and beyond self-service site creation, right? That folks should perhaps have the ability to just go create stuff. So you can put policies in place. Steven, correct me if I'm wrong, that's an Azure AD Premium.
At the moment, yes, it is. You have to have Azure AD Premium. In some cases, you have to have it for all the people who are in something, and in other cases, you just need to have to do it to create the policy. It depends on what you're doing and what you're doing it with.
It depends. It's the eternal consulted answer. It depends.
Yes.
But it does. And if you get confused, Pate Group's here to help, because it's confusing. But yeah, if you're even in Dynamics, Nick, I know you don't want to hear that, but in Dynamics, you can create Office 365 groups. And guess what? That team that's managing stuff in Dynamics gets a shared inbox, a shared calendar. Outlook, you're just getting the Outlook stuff, right? The inbox and the calendar. Planner, inbox, calendar. That calendar is going to be super important in Planner, because the whole reason you're there is to track tasks. So you get that ability in Planner. Everyone you add to the group can all see the stuff. If you need more, right, you have the ability to keep adding and building out. Teams gives you just about everything except, just thinking about day-to-day applications, pretty much everything except Yammer, if that's something your organization uses. But yeah, and like I said, you could add OneDrive here, because in OneDrive, you'll get your SharePoint site and your Outlook resources or assets. Pick your word of choice there. So public or private really is the next step. Maria, yeah, I'll be happy to send you that information too. Combine a team, and yes, you can teamify an Office 365 group. And where you would do that is if you have a modern team site that doesn't have a Microsoft team associated with it. You can go grab it. You do it from Teams. You create a team, and it will ask you for the existing Office 365 group that you want, and it combines those resources. Yes, excellent question. So public or private? If it's public, anyone can see it, can join it, can jump in. If it's private, only members have access to the site. Now they can still search and see that that private group exists, there are PowerShell scripts that keep that from happening. So there are ways to be like super secret with your groups, even your private groups. And there are ways to hide them from the gal. So if you're concerned about people going through the global I just blanked on that, global address list inside of Outlook, there are PowerShell scripts you can run to hide them. Do you get that request very often, Stephen?
No, not a
Okay.
lot.
We kind of joke internally that, maybe I'm about to now make it a joke externally too, that sometimes when people see that there are controls out there that you can place on things, Stephen, I'm totally throwing this
Like that,
into your corner too.
you're
This like,
Enter Emperor.
yes, you become Emperor Palpatine. You want to control it all. You want to close it down. You want supreme power. And we're really nervous about, trust is a strong word, trusting our users with these assets. So really, Nick just said he's had that request before. What's the harm in someone seeing that that group exists? If it's a legal group or they have really sensitive information, I get it. But I don't want anyone to know that HR has a team. Oh, okay. Just because they know it's there doesn't mean they have access to it, right? So just because there are policies out there doesn't mean we have to enforce every single one of them, but they're really good places to start considering. If you don't want everyone to be able to create a team, then you can absolutely, with the right Azure AD license, keep that from happening using your AD groups, your user groups, and your policies. Yeah, Nick's poker team. I want in on that. Training is going to be critical. It is critical. Always has been in my book, but I'm a trainer, so take that with a grain of salt. But once people learn how to utilize these assets that they get with these Office 365 groups, you can start, kind of being a little less strict with what folks can and can't do. But just be aware, you can choose to make your groups public. If it's a social group for everyone in the company, why not? The more the merrier. If it's your HR team or where departments are doing their department only collaboration, absolutely make those private.
And I'll say this, I've said the same thing for SharePoint permissions for a long time. If it is about security, if it is literally a requirement that other people not be able to get in, not be able to see something and all that, then yes, private settings, permissions, all that. If it's just to simplify things for the users, if you think that the users are overwhelmed by the number of things that they see and that you just want them to see only the things they need to interact with, there are other ways for them to manage that or for you to manage it for them besides locking down the permissions, locking down the groups.
Yep, absolutely. It's that age-old question, security need versus security want. Because the more you secure things, especially granularly, that's just the more you have to go manage down the road. Speaking of managing, you can manage your groups from SharePoint, kind of. And I realize there's no pause on this little GIF I inserted, so if it's making you motion sick, I apologize. But when you're in SharePoint, you click on that members group. You can add a member right there, or you can go to Outlook to add an owner or a guest. And our guests, remember, they can look, but they pretty much can't touch. It's like our visitors in SharePoint. So it does take you to Outlook, to that group resource where you have your calendar that you share and that inbox that you share. And you can manage things there. You can also edit those email settings for the group. Like, do you want to be copied in when someone else sends an email from the group, right? Little things like that. So SharePoint's one place you can start your management of your Office 365 groups. And then there's also, of course, the admin portal. So inside the admin portal, you've got the little link for groups, so that little navigation node for groups. You see I own this group and I am an admin in the admin portal. So in here, I can edit the name of the group. I can add owners. I can add members. Right? I can delete it. If it needs to go away, I can get rid of it from here too. I can add my visitors. So only our admins can get to this piece of it. If you're a SharePoint admin, you can get in here and you can see it, but you can't do anything. So that's worth noting. If you have access to the admin portal, but you can't manage any of these groups, then that would be a call to a global admin.
And just as a side note for you administrators, don't get too deep into this. Like if you decided that the group is bad, don't delete the SharePoint site and then delete the email address and exchange and then go in and delete this. Just delete the group. It takes care of the rest of it for you. It's not instantaneous, but it'll get rid of the SharePoint site. It'll get rid of the address. But if you do it out of sequence, it can cause you all kinds of problems. So just go to the group management and delete the group here, and it'll take care of the rest for you. The rest of it, like doing it all manually and everything, it's a pain. Trust me. So just delete it here. Yeah, and let Microsoft do the rest of it on its schedule.
Yeah, and Matthew asked a question. You break stuff by deleting the group, right? Yes. If by break you mean delete? Sure enough.
Well, and if you delete like the site, but you don't delete the group, that breaks stuff. If you delete the group, quote unquote, in Exchange settings, and you don't delete it here, you break stuff. So this is the best way to get rid of all of it over time. It still takes a little while, but this is the best starting place if you do want to delete the group.
And he's asking, it's a soft delete, right? Just in case. Oops.
It is for a while. I think it's like a 30-day soft delete.
Yep.
And that's another reason to do it from here, because then you can kind of cleanly restore things. But if you mangle it on the way to deleting it, you mangle it.
Oh, it's happened to us all at one point or another. If it hasn't happened to you, bless you. Does that delete a team as well? Oh, so Stephen, I'm going to let you address that question. We just had a longer one come in. I'm going to kind of read through. So if you start with your group, what's that domino effect?
If you delete it in Teams, then you're okay, because there is a place in Teams to do that. And it's in the Teams app. So if you're an owner and you delete it in Teams, it'll take care of the rest of it for you. But the thing where you get in trouble is where you step outside in the administrative area and you try to get intense about it and delete like the site and delete the Exchange stuff. Here is the best place to do it. But if you're in Teams, you can delete it there. And it's a soft delete, like they mentioned, so it doesn't immediately delete everything. But if you don't want people to be able to access it from Teams, that's the best place to start. But you have to be an owner in Teams. Joy, I think you remember when we first started experimenting with this, like you were trying to delete something, and I think maybe like I had created it for you or something, and you were like, why can't I delete it? And it was because I set you up as the only person in there, but you weren't actually the owner.
Right. Yep. Yeah, in the early days, Stephen and I set up and deleted and broke lots of stuff because that's half the fun. Breaking things.
For various definitions of fun.
Yeah.
But to untangle that mess, you have to be like, so like if you're a SharePoint administrator and you can't get to delete it here and you think, well, I'll just delete it in SharePoint, you've just created a lot of work for the tenant administrator. If you don't like the tenant administrator, great. But
but don't ever ask for a favor again.
Yeah, like they're taking notes.
Yes, they are, because admins we hold grudges sometimes. So Let me scroll back up. So a question just came up about security in SharePoint and permissions. Jeremy, hang with us for just a minute because the next slide literally will answer your questions. It says Outlook, Nick's chiming in saying Outlook is okay for deletions too. I've not started from Outlook for deleting things, but I could believe.
If that's the only, like if it's a team, no. But if it's just a group and it only exists as an Outlook group, then yes, you can do it there. But if it's a team, no, I wouldn't advise that.
Yeah, because there's just so many resources, and the way everything is hooked in together is very complicated.
And that's back to the primary use. So like if you create it in Planner, you can delete it in Planner. If you create it in Teams, you can delete it in Teams. So from the user side, you can delete it wherever you created it if you're the owner. But
Right.
from the administrative side is where I was really cautioning people on.
All right, so Jeremy, I'm gonna go to your slide, dude, because it's kind of a big deal. Let's see if I can click the button. There it is. What about the SharePoint groups? SharePoint groups are still invaluable, right? Because the Office 365 group is for those people who are churning out work in all of those resources. It's everything across the board. But, and I heard on a podcast the other day, I think it was Rob Foster over at Deloitte and Mark Rackley, or what's his title anymore? Is he CTO or CSO?
Mark here?
Yeah,
I
Mr.
believe
Rackley.
ESO.
The SharePoint hillbilly himself. They were having a conversation in the podcast, and it was like, okay, so there's the SharePoint team site that's backing up that team, right? And the permissions are bridged across it using that Office 365 group. So what do you do with that SharePoint team site? It's a SharePoint site, right? You need to have visitors from the organization come in and have access to that SharePoint site, throw them in your visitors group. If you need to run approvals on documents as they come in, set up your flows. And you know, we got that built-in one now for request sign-off. You're not limited to just that one documents library with our channel folders in there, right? If you need a policies library, create one. If you need a contact list, create one. That is your team site for your team to use. And you still have your owners, members, and visitors group, and you can still create custom groups. It's still there for you to use and utilize. The only thing thou shalt not do, unless you want to break something, is delete the folders that represent channels that are in that documents library. That's really the only thing that's quote unquote off limits. You can create a new view that kicks them out, right? So you don't see them in the view, but don't delete them. Use that default, leave that default all documents view alone.
That includes the permissions, by the way.
It includes the permissions. So an interesting question came up. I'm just going to read this for everybody to hear about a team or group SharePoint site, private group. You want to limit who can edit documents in the channel, the little files tab, right? So you've got group members in the visitors group in SharePoint. Group members can read, group owners have full control. I have not tested with, I have to think about that, right? Because this may be something I need to go through and work out, Philip, and then I'll shoot you some more info, because technically if someone only exists in that SharePoint visitors group, they don't have access to Teams. But so are we nesting the Office 365 group in the visitors? That worries me. Stephen, what do you think?
If you're nesting the Office 365 group
Into the SharePoint visitors group. I want to test that.
Yeah, I wouldn't hazard a guess on that one.
Yeah. So we'll get back to you on that one. It's an interesting thought. I will say they being Microsoft, have said they're going to release the ability to secure channels independent from the team that they're in. That makes me sad. Because if you're you're either part of the team or you're not, right? And if you want a separate set of permissions, then I don't know. I feel like that would be a different team. That's like the new modern architecture for SharePoint sites. If you need a new site with different permissions, go create a new site. Don't just create a new library and break it, or a folder and break it, or a subsite and break it. Flat architecture.
Well, I just had this discussion with a customer, and they were like, well, they understood what I was saying, but they were like, but this is what the users want. And so you can't argue with them. And I'm not saying necessarily argue with them,
Sure.
but try to persuade them to not do that. That like
Right.
when you're doing like modern team sites, you're doing teams, things like that. If they demand that you secure a library in the modern team site, it can still be done with standard SharePoint permissions instead of using group memberships and all that. But it's breaking the model of how things work. And so one of the examples that they had is they wanted to be able to, there used to be a web part that would show the membership of the site. And they were like, they liked that. And I'm like, yeah, but that was always a lie if you were breaking the permissions of the libraries anyway, because they saw this web part and it said these 5 people have access to these sites. But if you have libraries in there that you've taken 3 of those people out, they don't have access to everything in the site.
Yeah.
And it's the same way in the side panel of the modern pages. You look at the membership and it may show 2 members, but if you've given direct permissions to a library to 10 other people, it's not accounted for in the interface. It doesn't show up. And so it kind of breaks the methods that SharePoint is trying to use and that Microsoft is guiding you towards. When you see Microsoft say that they have simplified the permissions on the modern pages, that's what they mean. They mean that, you can break it down by just creating another team or creating another, team site or whatever. And, because it's all site collections and you can set up policies for how long it sits there and all those kinds of things, they're saying, go ahead, break it down as far as you want to. Because it's not a risk for you the way it used to be, where you had that sprawl on a server and then you had to go back and manually prune everything. You can set up things to help you keep track of that stuff in Office 365.
And let me address something too, because I felt through the force SharePoint admins roll their eyes and cringe a little bit when you said, just go create a new team, go create a new site. Okay, guys, gals, remember back in the day when someone needed help with their top level site that had 50 bajillion subsites? Nightmare, right? Nightmare. I promise you, having more site collections and fewer, perfect world, no subsites, very few subsites, way easier to manage than that ridiculous deep subsite structure with who knows where those permissions are broken, right? I promise you, I promise. Joyce SharePoint promises. It's still stuff to manage, but you have visibility into it. And if
And
you,
like I said, like I said, you can set up policies to tell you when something hasn't been used in 30 days. You can look at the site reports from the admin level, all
yeah,
that stuff, that wasn't quite so easy in
for
the
sure.
on-premises SharePoint.
Sure. Now, another Stephen is bringing up a good point. No way, we're not going to go create a new site just because I've got 2 document libraries that need to have different permissions. I don't disagree with you on that. If you literally have just a couple of assets that need to be secured differently, those aren't going to be impacting Teams, right? Because it's a different document library, so those files aren't accessible there. So we're not impacting the Office 365 group, right? You can break the permissions on those libraries. Now, let's say that starts to grow and those libraries start to have new assets and we have new processes and procedures and we start to need to divide out maybe owners, members, and visitors for the content in those libraries. Now we're starting to justify maybe a new site. But yeah, if I just, okay, look, I just need to break permissions on these, I'm just making it up, 2 things, just so either these folks can't get in there and do stuff, my visitors maybe, or so that these 3 people from outside can. I get it. I get it.
And I'll play devil's advocate there on, my advice has been the same for years. Try to push it to as high a level as you can. If they want to break permissions on 2 items in a library, do everything you can to stop it.
Yes. Amen.
If they want to do the permissions on a folder in a library, heartily push for a new library.
Yeah. Because data grows, right? Data is just going to grow. You can justify creating a new object.
Right. And then it's easier to move an entire library. It's not easy, but it's easier to move an entire library than it is to move 400 items that they've broken permissions on, or pry a folder out of one place and put it someplace else, with all the data intact. So just try your best to push it as high as you can, because when you say there's no way we're going to create a new site for 2 libraries, okay, but if those 2 libraries have 10,000 items in them, maybe it should be another site.
Yeah.
And if it's just 2 documents, I'm with you, but I still think those should be in a separate library.
Yeah. And I'm right there with you. Totally agree. Document library, yes. Folders and documents, no. Because we all know that waylays chaos. And I'm going to circle back to trying to restrict the Office 365 groups abilities within the SharePoint site. Let's think about roles. If they don't need to have, I'm going to say full, like membership access to the content inside of the SharePoint site, should they really be in that Office 365 membership group? Because it sounds like, I want you to be in places, but you're really not a group member. I need you to see stuff, but I don't really need you to do much. So it might even be worth thinking about, okay, why are those people here? Or if the people need to be there, maybe those assets we don't want them to see, or those documents and files, maybe those should be pulled out of that Files tab in Teams or the Documents library on that team site and put in a different library. And then it could be secured. Something like that, right? It's a huge conversation. And I'll say I'm really tempted to do some kind of something based on why planning is important when we're implementing these tools, because there's so many conversations to be had and so many viewpoints. And like Stephen said, we don't want to argue with our members. I'm not a parent, but I do have 2 dogs, and especially the little one, I think she's part goat. She wants to eat everything she sees. And I have to basically remind her, enforce to her, okay, I know you want that, and I know you think that's really, really, really important, but it's not good for you. So yes, I just equated our users to dogs. I feel bad about that. But we know we have a little bit more knowledge and information about these tools than our users do. So if we can have those general conversations, look, I really know you want just to be able to have everything in one library and then break it down by who can see what. It's not good for you. I promise it's not good for you. And just have those conversations. Even if you start small, maybe do a little proof of concept with them. It's worth the investment. It's worth the planning, and it's worth the conversation. Ooh, y'all.
I have nothing but sympathy for any of you administrators who, are dealing with those users who are very opinionated about the way things should be and about, well, we want this, why is that unreasonable? And you have to work on being persuasive. And I know for, some people that's not the easiest thing to do. And especially if you've gravitated towards an IT job, a lot of times you're not the most people person out there. Uh, but like I said, I have sympathy, but I work with Joy. Joy actively tries to break things. Like it's not just a matter of she wants to do something wrong because she's looking at it the wrong way. She wants to do it wrong so she breaks it, you know. So we've gone through this. Like, when we say it's a bad idea, we're not theorizing. Like, we've broken it this way
Many times.
many times.
I'm typing out an answer. I can't type and talk at the same time. Okay.
By the way, Joe, you have to make me an organizer instead of a panelist because I can't see those questions.
Oh, Stacy did that. I'm blaming Stacy. Under the bus. Didn't know you couldn't see that. Now I know the difference. I know the bare minimum of what GoToWebinar will do, and that's about it. I'm promising you guys and girls out there, I really want to start doing these as team live events. We're just trying to figure out, make the marketing people happy, right? Okay, some of you guys are like asking for information and some info on basics and things like that. I will get that to you. We have resources and I can get it to you for sure, and I will be happy to do that. Okay, looks like they're kind of settled down. If I've missed any questions, I apologize. I'll stay on even once the webinar officially wraps if anyone wants to circle back and we can chat. Let me see. Philip, I'm just reading through some of the stuff that you sent. It's line of business related. They need read-only access. Okay. Then I would look at adding visitors to the Office 365 group rather than nesting membership in that membership group into the SharePoint Online group, if that makes sense. There's a lot of different ways to kind of skin the cat. The cat typically hates all of them, but you can get it done.
Also, Joy, the all users except external.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about that at all, or do you want me to talk about it?
Go for it.
So there is a special group called all users except external users. That is automatically generated in Office 365. So for example, if Office 365 is your intranet, you might want to add that group to the visitors group for the root site collection. And that will automatically include anyone new in your organization that gets added to AD with licensing for SharePoint. And the same thing for public groups. If you can add that group that group is added as the way to make a public group. That's what makes it open to everyone. And so as soon as they exist in AD and they have licensing for all these things, then they can get into those things according to whatever level that group has been added. By default, I think it's just like a visitor in the public groups. Right. So you don't have to do any user action. You don't have to, like when you hire a new person, they just pop in. So it's kind of like the all users in AD, except for it's everyone except for people that you may have added as external users in your Azure AD.
Yep, and that's perfect for those. It's what I call the company public sites, right? It's the HR site where they put the forms you open and fill out and submit, who to contact in IT, right? Those sites that we set up, the New World, we typically recommend those are communication sites that everyone in the organization should have the ability to go consume data.
And Mike Zapp corrected me. The group is called everyone except external users.
There
I think
isn't
I said all
everyone,
users.
but be
Yes,
careful.
there is an everyone that also includes the external users. But
Yeah.
if you create a public group, it's everyone except external users.
Okay, chatter slowing down. I'm going to advance to the next slide. And I thought I had a treat. Where'd it go? All right, I couldn't do a Star Wars thing, anything without Chewbacca. So that's pretty much everything we wanted to share with you today. It's not just a single thread conversation, as we can see. When we start talking about Office 365 groups, right, we're talking about permissions and security throughout the landscape. Feel free to reach out to us with questions. I've got our contact information up there. I'm just a smidge more social than Steven, so I've got my @JoyOfSharePoint Twitter handle up there. I tweet a lot, but I try to make sure it's useful information. I try. Sometimes it's silly, but you got to have fun.
Just talk to her just a little bit on Twitter and she'll make you a Facebook friend too. Like,
I
that's
mean,
just
it
how
might happen. But yeah, Pate Group has an account out there too. We're always sharing information about the Office 365 ecosystem. So please hit us up on Twitter, find us. Those of you that ask for information, I'm going to be kind of downloading all of these questions into a spreadsheet so I can go through and see who is asking for what. So yeah, absolutely. Is there any reason to keep distribution lists on-prem, or should they be moved to Office 365 groups? Ooh, that's a good closing question. I like latest and greatest, so I would be tempted to convert them to an Office 365 group. But first, I would go talk to my users. Yeah, that's the hard part. And are you still using this? Do you still need this? What's going on with this? So it might be worth pruning that list before just moving it, kind of like when we migrate to SharePoint. DLs can be nested. Oof, nesting. Every time I see that word anymore in the modern world, I kind of cringe a little bit. All right, I'm going to turn off recording, but I'm going to hang out. Yeah, Jake, thanks for joining us. Let me see, stop recording.